The email came during a particularly low point in my life. Subject line: Job Opportunity, Fire Lookout Position, Montana Wilderness. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made me open it. Maybe it was desperation after losing my apartment in Chicago, or perhaps some deeper instinct pulling me toward what would become the most terrifying experience of my life. Seeking experienced individual for seasonal fire lookout position. May through September. Tomah Lookout, Northern Montana. Isolation experience preferred. Generous compensation. Reply for details. 2 weeks later, I found myself bouncing along a deeply rutted Forest Service road in a government-issued truck, following a taciturn ranger named Jim through the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. We'd been driving for nearly 3 hours since leaving the nearest town, a tiny outpost called Polebridge with a single general store that Jim had insisted I stock up at. Last chance for supplies? He'd warned, watching me load up on canned goods, batteries, and more toilet paper than seemed reasonable. Once you're up there, you're on your own until rotation or emergency. Now, as the truck jolted over another rocky section, I studied the paper map he'd given me. The lookout tower was marked with a tiny red X, deep in one of the most remote sections of wilderness in the continental United States. How much farther? I asked, breaking the silence that had persisted for the last hour. Jim grunted, eyes fixed on the deteriorating road. End of the line's coming up. Then we hike. Hike? How far? 4 miles, give or take. Uphill mostly. He glanced at my city boots and poorly packed backpack with what looked like mild contempt. Hope you're in better shape than you look. The road ended at a small clearing. Jim parked and we unloaded my gear plus the additional supplies for the lookout. My shoulders already ached under the weight of my pack as we started up the narrow trail that disappeared into thick pine forest. Any, wildlife I should worry about? I asked, trying to keep pace with Jim's efficient stride. Grizzlies, black bears, wolves, moose, mountain lions. He rattled off without breaking stride. Keep your food locked up and carry bear spray. Don't surprise anything bigger than you. 3 grueling hours later, drenched in sweat despite the cool mountain air, I caught my first glimpse of Tomah Lookout through the trees. It perched atop a rocky outcrop, a lone wooden structure with glass windows on all sides, standing on stilts that elevated it above the surrounding forest canopy. A narrow staircase zigzagged up to the platform. Home sweet home, Jim said, the first hint of emotion in his voice. Was it amusement? Pity? The interior of the lookout was a single room, perhaps 15 feet. A small bed occupied one corner, next to a tiny propane stove and sink. A wooden desk held maps and a large, circular device I would later learn was an Osborne firefinder, used to pinpoint smoke locations. A metal cabinet contained emergency supplies, radio equipment, and logbooks dating back decades. Jim gave me a quick orientation, showing me how to operate the radio, the propane system, and the firefinder. He pointed out the location of the outhouse down a short path, the rainwater collection system, and the solar panels that provided minimal electricity. Check in every morning at 800 hours. If you miss 2 check-ins, they'll send someone to make sure you're not dead. He paused, staring out at the vast wilderness, spreading in every direction. Nearest help is hours away, so don't do anything stupid. As the sun began to set, Jim prepared to leave. One more thing, he said, hand on the door. People get funny up here. The isolation does things to your mind. You start seeing things, hearing things that aren't there. It's normal. He tapped his temple. Just remember what's real. With that cryptic warning, he descended the stairs, his figure growing smaller as he disappeared into the forest below. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore, suddenly aware of the profound silence surrounding me. That night I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind whistle around the tower. The darkness outside was absolute, a void broken only by the brilliant canopy of stars visible through the windows. I'd never seen so many stars, never experienced such complete isolation. No car sounds, no distant sirens, no neighbors. Just me, alone, at the top of a mountain, miles from the nearest human. I must have drifted off eventually, because I woke with a start to a sound I couldn't immediately identify. A scratching, like fingernails on wood, coming from directly beneath the floor. I froze, straining to hear over my pounding heart. Scratch, 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 followed by something that sounded disturbingly like a whisper. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and afraid even to my own ears. Silence answered me. I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it out each window in turn, seeing nothing but darkness and the silhouettes of trees. The scratching didn't resume, and I told myself it was just the wind, or perhaps a branch against the tower's supports. But as I lay back down, a new sound emerged, faint, rhythmic breathing, just outside the door at the top of the stairs. I held my own breath, listening. It was steady, deliberate, unmistakably there. Then the door handle turned slowly, just a fraction of an inch, before stopping. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, in the clear light of day, I examined the door and found no signs of disturbance. The stairs were empty, the surrounding area clear of any visitors. I tried to laugh off my fears. Jim had warned me about this very thing, hadn't he? The isolation playing tricks on my mind. At precisely 800, I made my first radio check-in. "Toma lookout, reporting clear conditions. Over." The radio crackled. "Copy, Toma. This is dispatch. All quiet across the sector. Report any smoke sightings immediately. Over." "Copy that. Toma out." Simple. Professional. A brief connection to the outside world that somehow made everything seem normal again. I spent the day familiarizing myself with the tower's equipment, studying the maps, and even began reading the old logbooks. Most entries were mundane: weather conditions, smoke sightings, wildlife observations. But as I flipped through a logbook from 1994, an entry caught my eye. June 15. Clear conditions. No smoke. Heard the voices again last night. They're getting louder. Something's in the woods. Waiting. The entry was unsigned, different handwriting from the previous pages. I flipped forward. The next several pages had been torn out. That night, as darkness fell again, I secured the door, double-checking the lock before settling in with a book. The wind picked up, making the tower creak and sway slightly. Normal, I told myself. Just the wind. But then came a sound that froze my blood, a long, mournful howl. Not quite wolf, not quite human, echoing across the mountains. It rose in pitch, holding an impossible note before fading into silence. And from somewhere much closer, just beneath the floor of the tower, came the scratching again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Just the wind, I whispered to myself. Just the wind. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Because this time, when the scratching stopped, I distinctly heard a voicery and rasping, barely audible. "Let me in. I'm so cold." Morning couldn't come soon enough. I'd spent the night huddled on the bed, flashlight in one hand, bear spray in the other, listening to the scratching sounds that would start and stop at random intervals. The voice didn't return, but twice I heard what sounded like footsteps circling the tower. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, I finally relaxed enough to doze off. I woke with a jolt around 7:30 a.m., disoriented and groggy. The tower was silent now, filled with golden morning light that made the night's terrors seem absurd. After making my morning radio check-in, I decided to investigate. I descended the stairs slowly, scanning the ground around the tower's base. The dirt showed no footprints except my own and Jim's from the day before. I circled the entire structure, finding nothing unusual until I reached the north side. There, scratched into one of the wooden support posts, was a crude symbol, a circle with a vertical line through it. The scratches looked fresh, the exposed wood still light against the weathered gray surface. I ran my fingers over the marking, a chill running through me despite the warming day. Back inside, I searched through the logbooks again, this time with purpose. Most contained mundane entries about weather and fire conditions, but occasionally I'd find something odd. July 8th, 1976. Clear day. No smoke. Found another dead deer near the spring. No obvious wounds. Eyes missing. August 17, 1983. Heard someone calling my name from the forest last night. Radio isn't working. We'll try again tomorrow. June 24, 1994. They're getting closer. I can feel them watching. The symbols are appearing again. This last entry caught my attention. Symbols? Like the one I'd just found? I continued searching and discovered a thin manila folder tucked between two logbooks. Inside were several black and white photographs, yellowed with age. They showed various lookout towers, not just Toma, but others throughout the region. In each photo, the same symbol had been scratched or painted somewhere on the structure. The final photo made my stomach lurch. It showed a man standing in front of Toma Lookout, his face deliberately scratched out of the image. Written on the back in faded pencil, he heard them too. 1950. 2. I spent the next hour scanning through every logbook I could find, creating a timeline of strange occurrences. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 12 years or so, the logbooks would contain references to voices, scratching sounds, and unusual symbols. And 2024 marked exactly 12 years since the last cycle. My radio squawked, startling me so badly I knocked over a stack of books. Toma Lookout, this is dispatch. Come in. Over. I fumbled for the handset. This is Toma. Over. We're showing some unusual weather patterns heading your way. Storm system moving in faster than predicted. Secure all loose equipment and prepare for high winds tonight. Over. Copy that. We'll secure everything. Toma out. I moved to the windows, scanning the horizon. Sure enough, dark clouds were building in the west, still distant but moving quickly. A storm would normally be unwelcome, but part of me felt relieved the rational explanation for last night's sounds could simply be an approaching weather system. As I secured the shutters and checked my supplies, I found a notebook wedged behind the cabinet. Unlike the official logbooks, this appeared to be a diary kept by a previous lookout. The handwriting matched the disturbing entries I'd found from 1994. The first few pages contained normal observations and thoughts about isolation. But about halfway through, the writing changed, becoming more frantic. The words pressed harder into the paper. I know what they are now. They're not alive, not in the way we understand it. They're drawn to isolation, to loneliness. They feed on it, strengthen with it. The native people knew they never built permanent structures in these mountains, never stayed through the changing seasons. The symbols are protection. They can't cross the circle if it's unbroken. Salt works too, temporarily. They hate metal. Keep iron nearby. If you're reading this and hearing them too, it's already started. They've found you. They'll try to confuse you first, make you question your sanity. Then they'll try to lure you out. Don't leave the tower at night. No matter what you hear, no matter who it sounds like. Stay inside. If they get in, they take your form, your memories. They use them to lure the next person. It's a cycle. It's always been a cycle. The final entry was a hurried scrawl. They're here. Breaking through. The symbol didn't work. I can see them now. Black shapes, moving wrong. If you find this, burn the tower. It's the only way. The rest of the pages were blank. I closed the notebook with trembling hands just as the first distant rumble of thunder reached me. By late afternoon, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind buffeted the tower, making it sway alarmingly. I'd secured everything as instructed, and had just lit the kerosene lamp when the first lightning strike hit nearby, illuminating the forest in a brief, brilliant flash. In that instant, I saw them dark figures standing among the trees, dozens of them, all looking up at the tower. When darkness returned a split second later, I rushed to the window, straining to see, but there was nothing visible in the gloom. Just my imagination, I told myself. Lightning plays tricks. The storm intensified, thunder now a constant rumble overhead. Rain found its way through small leaks in the roof, dripping into pots and pans I'd placed strategically around the room. The radio hissed with static, occasionally picking up fragments of transmissions rendered unintelligible by the storm. Around midnight, the electricity failed completely. The solar batteries drained. I was left with just the kerosene lamp, its warm glow creating more shadows than it dispelled. That's when I heard Ida clear, distinct knocking at the door. 3 slow knocks, deliberate and unmistakable, even over the howling wind. I froze, the warning from the notebook flashing in my mind. Don't leave the tower at night. Who's there? I called, knowing there couldn't possibly be anyone else up here in this storm. Let me in, came a woman's voice, desperate and afraid. Please, I'm lost. I need help. Another flash of lightning, and in it, I glimpsed a figure on the platform outside the door, the silhouette of a woman, hair plastered to her face by the rain. The storm, she called. Please, I can't stay out here. Every instinct told me not to open the door, yet it seemed inhumane to leave someone outside in such conditions. I approached slowly, the warnings from the notebook warring with my natural instinct to help. How did you get up here? I shouted through the door. I was hiking, got lost, saw your light, please. Something wasn't right. No hiker would be on these remote trails in a storm, especially at night. And the voice there was something off about it, a hollowness behind the words. I remembered the iron. Moving quickly, I grabbed a cast iron pan from the tiny kitchen area and held it ready as I approached the door again. Step back from the door, I commanded. I'll open it, but you need to step back. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched for several seconds, broken only by the storm. Then, let me in. The voice had changed, deeper now, no longer pleading. Let me in, let me in, let me in. The words repeated, growing more distorted with each iteration until they didn't sound human at all. The door handle began to turn on its own, slowly at first, then rattling violently. I backed away, clutching the iron pan like a shield. You're not real, I whispered. A tremendous crash of thunder shook the tower, and the lamp flickered, nearly going out. When it stabilized, the rattling had stopped. I approached the door cautiously and placed my ear against it. Nothing. I sank to the floor, back against the door, the iron pan across my lap. I wouldn't sleep, wouldn't open the door. I'd wait out the night. Hours passed, the storm gradually moving eastward, its fury diminishing. I must have dozed despite my determination to stay awake, because I jerked to consciousness at the sound of the radio crackling to life. Through waves of static came a voice I recognized as Jim's. Tama, look out. Emergency evacuation. Coming to get you. Stay inside. The transmission cut out before I could respond. Evacuation? Why? Had someone reported my strange radio behavior? Or was there some other danger I wasn't aware of? Or was it another trick? The first light of dawn was breaking. The storm now just a gentle rain. I stood on shaky legs and peered out each window in turn. The forest looked peaceful. No sign of the figures I thought I'd seen. As I completed my circuit of the windows, movement on the ground caught my eye, a person walking up the trail toward the tower. Relief flooded through me. Jim had come back, just as the radio had said. But as the figure emerged from the tree line, I realized it wasn't Jim at all. It was me. The figure that looked exactly like me stopped at the base of the tower, tilted its head back, and smiled a too wide grin that stretched unnaturally across my own face. Even from this distance, I could see something was wrong with its eyes. They were black, entirely black, like holes punched into reality. No, I whispered, backing away from the window. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating or dreaming. The isolation, the storm, the lack of sleep, it was all catching up to me. The radio crackled again. Toma, look out. Do you copy? This is real dispatch, not emergency channel. Report status immediately. Over. I grabbed the handset with trembling fingers. Dispatch. This is Toma. There's someone here. Someone outside the tower. A pause then. Toma, we have no personnel in your sector. Last ranger check is scheduled for next week. Can you describe what you're seeing? Over. Before I could respond, a sharp rapping came at the window, not the door this time. I turned to see my doppelganger peering in, that impossible smile still fixed on its face, its black eyes unblinking. It raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass, the flesh seeming to deform slightly, as if made of something softer than human tissue. It looks like me, I managed, unable to look away from the thing outside. But wrong. Its eyes are black. Toma, you're not making sense. Are you experiencing a medical emergency? Over. The creature at the window opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth where human teeth should be. Its jaw distended, stretching far wider than any human mouth could open, and it pressed its face against the glass, fogging it with unnatural breath. "Send help," I whispered into the radio. "Please, it's not human." The radio went silent, and I knew how I must sound delusional, having some kind of breakdown. But the thing at the window was real, tapping now with one long finger, the nail scraping against the glass in that familiar pattern I'd heard beneath the floor. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It pulled back suddenly, that grotesque smile returning, and pointed to the door. Then it descended the stairs, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait, as if its joints bent in the wrong directions. I rushed to secure the door, dragging the heavy metal cabinet in front of it. As I did, I noticed something I'd overlooked in my earlier Panica line of rust-colored powder across the threshold. Salt? Iron filings? Whatever it was, it had been deliberately placed there, perhaps by the previous lookout. The radio crackled again. "Toma, we're sending a welfare check. ETA 4 or 5 hours depending on trail conditions. Please respond if you can hear this. Over." I snatched up the handset. "I hear you, please hurry. I don't think I'm alone up here." "Copy that. Try to remain calm. Secure yourself in the tower and wait for assistance. Over." The thing that looked like me had disappeared from view. I circled the tower, checking each window carefully, but could see no sign of it on the ground below. The forest had returned to its peaceful morning state, birds singing as if nothing unusual had occurred. Had I imagined it all? Was I truly losing my mind? I retrieved the notebook I'd found, flipping to the frantic warnings. "They'll try to confuse you first, make you question your sanity." According to the notebook, these things, whatever they were fed, on isolation and loneliness. They appeared every 12 years. They could take human form, use memories. The previous lookout had mentioned symbols for protection, salt, iron. I searched the tower more thoroughly, looking for anything that might help. Under the bed, I found a small wooden box containing an assortment of items, a small pouch of salt, iron nails, and a folded paper with the circle and line symbol drawn in what looked like dried blood. I took the salt and began laying a line around the interior perimeter of the tower, reinforcing the existing line at the doorway. I placed the iron nails at each window, then hesitated over the blood symbol. Something about it felt wrong, dangerous even. Instead, I retrieved my compass and used it to draw my own version of the symbol on a piece of paper, placing it on the center of the floor. The needle of the compass spun wildly as I set it down, never settling on north. Hours passed with no further sign of the doppelganger. I maintained my watch at the windows, jumping at every creak of the tower and rustle from the forest below. The promised rescue team would arrive soon if I could just hold out until then. As midday approached, movement in the trees caught my eye. A figure emerged onto the trail arranger in the familiar green uniform. Relief flooded through me until I realized it was moving with that same wrong gait I'd seen earlier. Behind it came another, and another, a procession of figures that looked human from a distance but moved all wrong. They gathered at the base of the tower, looking up with identical expressions, heads tilted at unnatural angles, mouths stretched in those too wide smiles. Among them, I recognized faces from the photographs I'd found lookouts from decades past. All returned, all wrong. One stepped forward, the doppelganger again. It raised both arms, as if in supplication, and spoke in a voice that was almost mine, but layered with other voices beneath it. "We've been waiting for you. For so long. You belong with us now." The others took up the refrain, a discordant chorus. "With us. With us. With us." I backed away from the window, heart hammering in my chest. The voices continued, now coming from all sides of the tower, as if the creatures had surrounded it completely. "You're already one of us. Look." Something compelled me to look down at my hands. For a moment, just a moment, they didn't look like my hands at all, but something pale and wrong, with 2 long fingers and blackened nails. I blinked, and they were normal again. A trick of the light. It had to be. The radio sparked to life. "Toma, look out. This is Ranger Adams. We're on the trail heading your way. ETA 30 minutes. Do you copy? Over. I grabbed the handset. Don't come. They're waiting for you. They look like people, but they're not. Static was my only answer. The creatures below had begun to climb the stairs, moving in that broken, jerky way, pulling themselves up with unnatural strength. I could hear the wood creaking under their weight. I retreated to the center of the room, standing inside the circle symbol I'd drawn. The salt line at the door was my last defense, would it hold? The notebook had said the symbols were protection, that they couldn't cross an unbroken circle. The first creature reached the platform outside the door, the one wearing my face. It pressed against the door, not trying the handle this time, just leaning its weight against the wood. The cabinet I'd pushed against it began to inch forward as the door bowed inward under impossible pressure. "Let us in," it said, my voice twisted into something horrible. "We're so cold out here." The cabinet moved another inch. The door frame splintered. I clutched the iron pan in one hand, the pouch of salt in the other. I would throw the salt if they got in, use the iron if I had to. But against so many. A new sound cut through the creature's whispers, the steady thump of helicopter rotors approaching. Through the western window, I spotted a Forest Service helicopter, flying low over the trees. The effect on the creatures was immediate. They froze, those black eyes turning skyward. The pressure against the door ceased. "Toma, look out. This is Rescue 1, came a new voice on the radio. "We've been dispatched for emergency evacuation. We're coming in for landing in the clearing east of your position. Prepare for immediate extraction. Over." The creatures were retreating, slinking back down the stairs, disappearing into the forest with unnatural speed. All except the doppelganger, which remained at the door, its black eyes fixed on me through the window. "We'll wait," it said, its voice now a multi-toned hiss. "We're patient. So patient. And when they leave you here again, because they will, we'll be ready." It backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact until it reached the stairs. Then it too was gone, vanished into the trees below. The helicopter landed in a small clearing about 100 yards from the tower. Two figures in Forest Service uniforms emerged, approaching cautiously, rifles at the ready. I watched them through the window, paranoia making me hesitant. Were these real rescuers? Or more of the creatures in disguise? "Toma, look out. This is Ranger Ellis with Ranger Patel. We're approaching your position. Please identify yourself and confirm you're alone in the tower. Over." I picked up the radio with shaking hands. I'm the fire lookout. I'm alone, but there were things. People. But not people. They were trying to get in. The Rangers exchanged glances but continued their approach, moving professionally, scanning the surroundings. "Stay inside until we reach you," Ellis replied. "We'll clear the area." I watched them climb the stairs, each movement deliberate, human. When they reached the door, Ellis knocked 3 sharp raps, nothing like the slow, deliberate knocking from before. "Look out. We need you to move any barricades from the door. We're here to help." I hesitated, then slowly pushed the cabinet away from the door. As I did, I noticed the salt line had been broken, grain scattered across the floor. The door opened, revealing 2 normal human faces concerned, professional, blessedly real. Ellis entered first, eyes quickly scanning the tower's interior while Patel remained at the doorway, watching the forest. "Are you injured?" Ellis asked, gaze taking in my disheveled appearance. "No, they didn't get in." "Who didn't get in?" How could I explain what I'd seen? There were people, or things that looked like people. One looked exactly like me. Ellis's expression remained neutral, but I saw the look he exchanged with Patel. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. "We need to evacuate you immediately," Ellis said, all business. "Grab only essential personal items. The weather's turning again, and we have a narrow window for extraction." "But the tower me position." "Forest Service is suspending operations at Toma for the remainder of the season. There's a weather system moving in that could last weeks. Not safe to leave anyone up here." As I gathered my few belongings, Patel spoke into her radio, confirming the extraction was proceeding. Ellis examined the tower, pausing at the salt lines and the symbol I'd drawn. "Found these here?" he asked, indicating the items from the box. I nodded. In a box under the bed. There was a notebook too, warnings about something that comes every 12 years. Ellis's expression changed subtly. Let me see the notebook. I handed it over, watching as he flipped through the pages with increasing interest. When he reached the final frantic entry, he closed it carefully and tucked it into his jacket. We should document this, I said, for the next lookout, so they know. There won't be a next lookout, Ellis interrupted. Not at Toma. Not anymore. 10 minutes later, we were in the helicopter, rising above the tower. As we banked away, I looked down at the structure, now small and vulnerable looking amid the vast wilderness. Something moved at the tree linea group of figures, emerging from the forest. Among them, my doppelganger stared up at the departing helicopter, that inhuman smile still fixed on its face. Then the clouds closed in, and Toma Lookout disappeared from view. The helicopter delivered us to a Forest Service station near Kalispell, where I was immediately taken to a small medical facility for evaluation. The doctor was kind but probing, asking about my sleep patterns, any history of mental illness, whether I was taking any medications. I answered truthfully, knowing how my story must sound. After a brief physical examination, I was left alone in a sterile room with a promise that someone would be by to talk to me soon. The door wasn't locked, but a uniformed officer sat in the hallway outside, ostensibly for my protection. 2 hours later, a woman in civilian clothes entered, introducing herself as Dr. Abernathy from the Forest Service Psychological Support Division, a department I hadn't known existed. How are you feeling? She asked, taking a seat across from me. Like everyone thinks I'm crazy, I replied honestly. She smiled slightly. No one thinks you're crazy, but you experienced something traumatic, and we need to understand what happened. I told the Rangers everything. There were entities, creatures pretending to be human, trying to get into the tower. Dr. Abernathy nodded, expression neutral. And one of these entities looked exactly like you. Yes, it was perfect, except for the eyes, and the way it moved. She made a note on her tablet. You found a notebook in the tower, correct? Written by a previous lookout? Yes, Ranger Ellis took it. We'd like you to tell us everything you learned from that notebook and any other materials you found in the tower. Something in her tone made me hesitate. This didn't feel like a psychological evaluation. It felt like debriefing. Why is that important? Dr. Abernathy considered me for a moment. We've had incidents at Toma Lookout before. Your experience isn't unique. My heart raced. So you believe me? Let's just say we're keeping an open mind. Tell me about the symbols you found. I described the circle with the line through it, the salt lines, the warnings about iron. Dr. Abernathy listened intently, occasionally making notes, but never expressing surprise or disbelief. When I finished, she stood. Thank you for your cooperation. You'll be transported to Kalispell tomorrow, where we've arranged accommodations while you decide your next steps. The Forest Service will compensate you fully for the season despite the early termination. That's it? You're not going to tell me what's really going on at Toma? Dr. Abernathy paused at the door. What's going on is that you experienced a traumatic event, possibly exacerbated by isolation and stress. Get some rest, Mr. Your last name. You've been through a lot. She left, closing the door behind her. I immediately tried to open it, finding it now locked. My protection had become detention. That night, I lay on the narrow bed, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that distorted version of my own face, that inhuman smile. I kept checking my hands, half expecting to see those elongated fingers, the blackened nails. Around midnight, I heard voices in the hallway, urgent, hushed conversation. I moved to the door, pressing my ear against it. Third incident in the cycle. We can't keep this quiet forever. The containment has held for decades. One breach doesn't. This is more than a breach. They're evolving, learning. The symbols aren't working like they used to. The voices moved away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Containment? Cycles? It sounded like they knew exactly what was happening at Toma Lookout. I needed answers. and I wouldn't get them waiting for my transfer to Kalispell. The window in my room was small, but not barred. Outside was a short drop to a gravel path that led around the building. The night was clear, the station quiet except for a few lit windows in the main building. Decision made, I forced the window open and slipped out into the cool night air. The station was smaller than I'd thought, just 3 buildings arranged around a central parking area. My objective was the main administrative building where I'd seen Dr. Abernathy enter after our conversation. If there were records about Tomah Lookout and whatever was happening there, they'd be inside. I skirted the perimeter, staying in the shadows, and reached a side door. It was locked, but a window nearby had been left partially open. I hesitated only briefly before climbing through, finding myself in what appeared to be a break room. The building was dimly lit, most offices dark. I moved quietly down the hallway, checking door labels until I found one marked Archives. Locked, of course. But above the door frame, partially hidden by a ceiling tile, was a key. Classic hiding spot. The key worked and I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. The archives room contained rows of filing cabinets and a few older computers. A sign on the wall read, Montana Region 1 Incident Reports Classified. Below it were filing cabinets labeled by year, going back decades. I started with the current year, finding nothing about Tomah Lookout. Moving backwards, I discovered a thin file from 2012 labeled Tomah Anomaly Cycle 7. Inside was a brief report describing the evacuation of a lookout who had reported auditory and visual hallucinations consistent with previous cycles. The lookout had been treated for acute stress disorder and relocated to Oregon. The 2000 file was thicker, containing photographs of symbols carved into trees around the lookout tower, identical to the one I'd found. The report mentioned entity containment protocols and referenced something called the Tomah event from 1952. I searched for 1952, finding a sealed envelope marked Level 5 Clearance Only in faded red ink. My hands trembled as I carefully opened it. Inside was a typed report, the paper yellowed with age. Incident report. Tomah event. July 1950. 2. Personnel. Lookout Jacob Mercer, Rangers Ellis Blackwood, and Samuel Porter. Summary. Responding to missed radio check-ins, Rangers Blackwood and Porter hiked to Tomah Lookout on July 17, 1952. Tower found abandoned, extensive blood evidence throughout. Lookout Mercer's personal effects present, but no sign of Mercer himself. Rangers reported unusual markings, see Appendix A, carved into tower structures and surrounding trees. Local tribal consultant identified markings as binding symbols used by indigenous peoples to contain forest spirits. During investigation, rangers reported multiple human figures emerging from forest, moving in unnatural manner. Figures reportedly resembled missing lookouts from the region, including Mercer. Rangers barricaded themselves in tower. Ranger Porter committed suicide by self-inflicted gunshot wound after claiming his skin was changing. Ranger Blackwood maintained position until rescue team arrival on July 20. Containment protocol implemented per Directive 17B. Symbols reinforced annually. Tomah Lookout to remain operational with enhanced screening of personnel and 12-year rotation of active monitoring during July-August. Note: indigenous accounts suggest entities are not malevolent by nature but become corrupted through contact with human fear. They cannot create, only imitate. They are drawn to isolation and strong emotion. Theory: they feed on the psychological distress of isolated individuals. Level 5 Addendum. Testing of biological material left by entities shows partial DNA match to missing persons, but with unexplained anomalies. Material deteriorates rapidly upon collection. Suggestion that entities are attempting to achieve complete human mimicry with each cycle, becoming more perfect in their imitations. Recommendation: continue containment rather than elimination attempt. Indigenous partners advise that destruction of entities may have unintended consequences for the balance. Attached to the report were several black and white photographs, the same ones I'd found in the tower but unaltered. The scratched-out face in the photo of the man in front of Toma Lookout wasn't scratched out at all. It was blurred, as if in motion during the exposure. But the blurring formed a distinct pattern, a face that was almost human but wrong in subtle, horrifying ways. I was so engrossed in the files that I didn't hear the door open. A throat cleared behind me, and I spun to find Dr. Abernathy standing there, arms crossed. "Finding everything you need?" she asked calmly. "What are they?" I demanded, holding up the 1952 report. "What's really happening at Toma?" She sighed, closing the door behind her. "Sit down, mister. Your last name? I suppose you've earned some answers." Dr. Abernathy took a seat across from me. "What you encountered at Toma Lookout has been a phenomenon the Forest Service has monitored since the 1950s. The indigenous peoples of this region were aware of it long before that. The notebook called them not alive, not in the way we understand it." She nodded. "That's as good a description as any. We don't fully understand what they are. Spirits, entities, manifestations, the terminology isn't important. What matters is that they're contained. Contained but not destroyed. Why? Because we can't destroy them, not completely. And because there's a balance." She gestured to the files. "As you've read, they appear in cycles. They're drawn to isolation, to human consciousness separated from others. They feed, for lack of a better word, on the psychological experience of solitude. They were trying to get into the tower. They looked like people one. Looked exactly like me. They imitate what they're drawn to. Over the decades, they've gotten better at it. In the early cycles, they could only manage rough approximations of human forms. Now they can create nearly perfect duplicates, at least visually. But why keep sending people to the lookout if you know about this?" Dr. Abernathy's expression hardened slightly. "The containment requires human presence. The symbols, the iron, the salt, they're part of it, but they need activation through human consciousness. Without a lookout present during the critical weeks of the cycle, the containment weakens. So you've been sending people up there as bait, as sacrifices?" My voice rose in anger. "No one has been sacrificed," she said firmly. "We evacuate at the first sign of a breach. What you experience the entities attempting to enter the tower indicates the containment is failing. That's concerning. And what happens if it fails completely?" Dr. Abernathy was quiet for a moment. "We don't know exactly, but indigenous accounts suggest the entities would no longer be bound to that location. They could spread, continue their mimicry elsewhere, in populated areas." The implication was chilling. "How do you know they haven't already? That doppelganger, what if it got away? What if it's pretending to be me somewhere?" "We have methods of detection." She didn't elaborate. "But your concern is valid. That's why we're implementing a new containment protocol. Toma Lookout will be decommissioned and a more permanent solution established." "What kind of solution?" She stood. "That's classified, I'm afraid. Now, you have a choice. You can cooperate, sign our non-disclosure agreement, accept generous compensation, and move on with your life. Or you can continue asking questions, in which case we'll be forced to discredit you entirely. Mental health episode, hallucinations, delusions, you understand how it would look." The threat was clear. "And if I sign your agreement, what then?" "Then you go home with a good story you can never tell. We arrange for counseling if you need it. Life returns to normal." But I knew it wouldn't. Not really. Not after what I'd seen. "I need time to think," I said finally. Dr. Abernathy nodded. "You have until morning. I suggest you return to your room before anyone else realizes you're missing." As I stood to leave, a final question occurred to me. The ranger who came to get me, Ellis. The report from 1952 mentioned a Ranger Ellis Blackwood. Any relation? Something flickered across Dr. Abernathy's face of surprise, quickly masked. "I wouldn't know. It's a common name." But her reaction told me otherwise. There was more to this story, more she wasn't telling me. I returned to my room undetected, but sleep remained elusive. My mind kept returning to the images I'd seen, the warnings in the notebook, and the cryptic conversation with Dr. Abernathy. The containment was failing. The entities were evolving. And somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness, my doppelganger was waiting, wearing my face, learning to be more human with each passing day. 6 months passed. I signed their agreement, took their money, and tried to forget. I moved to Seattle, found an apartment with too many neighbors and too much noise, the opposite of isolation. I told myself the constant presence of other humans would keep me safe. The nightmares continued. In them, I was back in the tower, but I was both inside and outside the terrified lookout and the smiling thing with black eyes. I would wake gasping, checking my hands, my eyes in the mirror, making sure I was still me. Dr. Abernathy arranged for counseling as promised. The therapist was skilled but clearly briefed on what he could and couldn't discuss. We talked around the truth, using metaphors and euphemisms. Your experience with isolation, he called it. Your encounter with the unknown. By winter, the dreams had become less frequent. I established a routine, made acquaintances, if not friends. Life acquired a veneer of normalcy. Then the package arrived, a small brown paper parcel with no return address, postmarked from Kalispell, Montana. Inside was a single item, a Polaroid photograph showing Tomah Lookout partially dismantled, surrounded by construction equipment. Written on the back in familiar handwriting, "They're doing it wrong. The symbols must remain intact. Containment failing. Need your help." I recognized the handwriting from the notebook in the tower, but that was impossible. Those entries were from 1994, 30 years ago. That night, my phone rang at exactly midnight. The caller ID showed only unknown. I answered, hearing nothing but static at first, then a voice distorted, distant but unmistakably my own. "Coming home soon. We miss you." The line went dead. The next morning, I booked a flight to Montana. I told myself it was to prove the calls and package were just harassment, perhaps from someone in the Forest Service who resented my intrusion into their secrets. I told myself I needed closure. Deep down, I knew I was being pulled back, drawn by something I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. Kalispell in February was blanketed in snow, the mountains stark and beautiful against the winter sky. I rented a 4-wheel drive and headed north toward Polebridge, following the same route Jim had taken me on that first day, months ago. The tiny outpost was quiet, just a few locals gathered at the mercantile. I bought supplies more than I needed for what I told myself would be a quick reconnaissance and asked casual questions about Forest Service activity near Tomah Lookout. "They've been up there all winter," the shopkeeper told me, eyeing my city clothes with suspicion. "Some kind of special project. Research station, they're saying." "Research on what?" He shrugged. "Above my pay grade. But they've been bringing in some heavy equipment, concrete, building something to last, looks like." I thanked him and left, following the Forest Service road as far as I could. Much of it had been improved, widened to accommodate larger vehicles. When the snow became too deep, I parked and continued on snowshoes I'd purchased in Kalispell. The forest was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath my feet. As I approached the area where Tomah Lookout should be, I began to notice changes, new access roads, cut through the trees, temporary structures erected in small clearings, and something Elsie symbols carved into the trees, fresh marks in the bark, the circle with the vertical line, over and over, forming a perimeter. I reached the ridge that overlooked the lookout site, just as the sun was beginning to set. What I saw stopped me cold. The tower was gone, completely dismantled. In its place was a concrete foundation for a much larger structure, still under construction. Metal scaffolding rose from the center, surrounded by construction equipment. All silent now, as the workers had presumably left for the day. In the center of the foundation was a large, circular depression, lined with what looked like iron. Around its perimeter, the now familiar symbols had been etched into the concrete at regular intervals. It looked like a cage being built from the ground up, a permanent containment structure to replace the aging lookout tower. As darkness fell, I made camp in a sheltered area with a clear view of the construction site. I told myself I was just observing, gathering information to take back to whom? The authorities? The media? I had signed an NDA, and even without it, who would believe such a story? I dozed fitfully, waking often to check the site below. Around midnight, I noticed lights moving among the trees' flashlights, bobbing in the darkness. Workers returning for a night shift? But there were no vehicles, no sounds of machinery. The lights converged on the construction site, revealing figures moving with that distinctive wrong gait I remembered all too well. The entities had returned. I counted at least a dozen of them, gathered around the circular depression in the foundation. They carried objects, branches, stones, small animals, placing them in the center of the circle. A grotesque offering. Among them was my doppelganger, still wearing my face but moving with increasing fluidity, its mimicry improving. It directed the others, pointing and gesturing. The leader of the group. Without warning, all the entities turned in unison, looking directly at my hidden observation point. My doppelganger smiled that too wide smile and waved, beckoning me to join them. They knew I was here. Had known all along. I retreated deeper into the trees, heart pounding. They didn't pursue, seemingly content to know I was watching. I circled wide around the construction site, moving back toward where I'd parked the rental car. I needed to warn someone, Dr. Abernathy, the Forest Service, anyone who would listen. The containment wasn't working. The entities were actively subverting it. As I hurried through the dark forest, I became aware of shapes moving parallel to my path, figures flitting between trees, always just at the edge of vision. They were hurting me, I realized with growing horror. Not toward the car, but away from it. I changed direction, trying to break through their loose cordon, but they adjusted, always maintaining their distance, always keeping me moving toward some unknown destination. After an hour of this terrible game, I emerged into a small clearing and saw Ida Cabin, lights glowing warmly in the windows. A Forest Service research station, perhaps? Salvation? As I approached, the door opened, spilling golden light onto the snow. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a man tall and thin. "We've been expecting you," he called. "Come in before you freeze." Something in his voice made me hesitate. It was human, normal, and yet. "Who are you?" I called back. "A friend. Someone who understands what you've seen." He stepped forward into the light. It was Ranger Ellis, the same man who had evacuated me from the tower months ago. But there was something different about him, something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "The entities," I said, keeping my distance. "They're not contained. They're at the construction site right now." Ellis smiled slightly. "I know. That's their place. We're building it for them." "What?" "The Forest Service is containing them, not helping them." "The Forest Service thinks they're containing them," Ellis corrected. "They don't understand what they're dealing with. Never have." He gestured to the cabin. "Please come inside. There's someone who wants to meet you." Every instinct screamed danger, but where else could I go? The entities were in the forest all around us, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. At least in the cabin, I'd be out of the cold. I followed Ellis inside, finding the interior surprisingly comfortable, a living area, with a stone fireplace, basic furnishings, and walls lined with books and maps. At a table in the center of the room sat an elderly man, his face deeply lined, his eyes sharp and alert. "This is Jacob," Ellis said simply. The name registered immediately. "Jacob Mercer? From the 1950? 2 report?" The old man nodded, his expression grave. "The same, though the Forest Service believes I died over 70 years ago. But that's impossible. You'd be over 100 years old." 105, Jacob confirmed, though age works differently for those who've been touched by the entities. Ellis brought me a mug of hot coffee. I accepted it cautiously, not drinking yet. "I don't understand." "The report said you disappeared, that there was blood in the tower." "There was blood," Jacob agreed. "Mine and theirs. They came for me, just as they came for you. But unlike you, I wasn't rescued." His eyes took on a distant look. "They took me into the forest, showed me things, changed me." "Changed you how?" Jacob rolled up his sleeve, revealing an arm that appeared normal at first glance, but upon closer inspection showed subtle abnormalities, the joints not quite right, the skin texture slightly off. I'm not entirely human anymore, he said simply. Not entirely one of them either. Something in between. I set the coffee down, untouched. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? To correct a misconception, Ellis interjected. The entities aren't evil. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're trying to communicate, to connect. By terrorizing people? By trying to break into the tower? Jacob leaned forward. They're drawn to human isolation because they're isolated themselves, the last of their kind. They were here long before humans came to these mountains. They lived in harmony with the indigenous peoples, who understood them, respected them. But when European settlers arrived, bringing fear and violence, the entities absorbed those emotions, reflected them back. A cycle of fear began. The Forest Service thinks they're containing a threat, Ellis added. What they're actually doing is perpetuating that cycle. The containment causes pain, and pain makes the entities more aggressive, more desperate. So what's the alternative, I asked. Let them roam free? Let them take more people? Not take, Jacob corrected. Transform. Join with. It's a symbiosis, not a possession. A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. Ellis. The Ellis who rescued me from the tower. Was that you, or? Ellis smiled, and for a moment, just a momentous eyes seemed to darken. Both. I am Ellis Blackwood, great-grandson of the original Ranger Blackwood from 1952. But I've also been augmented. The entities can share consciousness with those who are willing. You're working with them. It wasn't a question. We're trying to break the cycle, Jacob said. The new structure the Forest Service is building, they think it's a better containment system. But with our adjustments, it will actually be a conduit, a place where humans and entities can interact safely, without fear driving the encounter. And then what? What do they want? To not be alone, Jacob said simply. To be understood. To be part of something again, as they were with the original inhabitants of this land. I looked between them, these men who were not entirely men anymore. And you brought me here because they remember you, Ellis said. Your doppelganger, the one that wears your face, it's connected to you in ways we don't fully understand. It's been waiting for you to return. It's been calling to you, hasn't it? Jacob asked. Dreams, visions, feelings of being pulled back here. I couldn't deny it. The package, the phone call. That was you? The package was me, Ellis admitted. The call, that was your other self. A knock at the door made us all turn. Ellis and Jacob exchanged looks. It's time, Jacob said softly. Ellis opened the door, revealing my doppelganger standing on the threshold, snow dusting its shoulders. Its black eyes fixed on me, that unnatural smile spreading across its face. Hello, it said, its voice an echo of my own. I've been waiting to meet myself properly. I backed away, looking for an escape route. But Jacob's hand on my arm stopped me. His grip was surprisingly strong for a centenarian. Don't be afraid, he said. Fear is what poisoned them in the first place. Listen to what it has to say. The doppelganger entered. Movement still wrong but smoother than before, closer to human. It approached until it stood directly in front of me, our faces mirror images apart from those bottomless eyes. What are you? I whispered. I am you, it replied. And not you. I am what you could become. I don't want to become anything. I want to go home, to forget this place. The doppelganger tilted its head, an unsettlingly bird-like motion. You can't forget. We're connected now. You came back because you knew that. It reached out slowly, offering its hand-to-hand identical to mine in every detail. We can show you wonders. The forest holds secrets humans have forgotten. Join with us. And remember. Ellis and Jacob watched silently, neither interfering. This was what they had brought me here for, this choice. And if I refuse? Then you leave, Jacob said. Return to your life, your nightmares, your endless questions. The pull will grow stronger over time, but you can resist it. For a while. But the cycle continues, Ellis added. More lookouts, more fear, more containment, until something breaks permanently. I looked at the offered hand, then at the inhuman eyes of my other self. Behind the darkness, I sensed something ancient and lonely, something that had watched the mountains rise and the forests grow, something that remembered a time when humans and non-humans communicated, when the boundaries between worlds were more permeable. Will I still be me? I asked. If I join with it? Yes and no, Jacob answered honestly. You'll be more than you are now. Different, but your core self remains. The doppelganger's hand remained extended, patient, waiting for my decision. In that moment, standing in a cabin in the remote Montana wilderness, facing a creature that wore my face, I made a choice that would change everything, a choice to embrace the unknown rather than fear it. I reached out and took its hand. The sensation began as warmth, spreading from our connected palms up my arm. Not painful, but intense, like plunging into a hot spring after being in snow. The doppelganger's black eyes widened, and within their darkness, I saw stars, forests, mountain centuries of memories not my own. Don't fight it, Jacob advised from somewhere distant. Let it flow through you. The boundaries of myself began to dissolve, my consciousness expanding to include perspectives and sensations I had no words for. I was still me, but also something that could perceive the living energy of the forest, the slow thoughts of ancient trees, the quick, bright sparks of animal minds. And I understood at last what the entities truly were: not monsters, not spirits, but the original consciousness of this place. Fragments of the land itself, given awareness through millennia of evolution. They had been part of the natural balance until human fear disrupted that balance, trapping them in a cycle of mimicry and terror. As the merger completed, my vision cleared. I looked down at my hands, still my hands, but I could now see the subtle energy flowing through them, connecting me to everything around me. When I looked up at Jacob and Ellis, I saw them differently too, human and non-human aspects coexisting within each of them, beautiful in its complexity. Welcome, Jacob said simply. The world had changed, or rather, my perception of it had. The cabin seemed alive with subtle movements and energy. Through the walls, I could sense the forest, the mountains, the sky, all part of a vast, interconnected web that I now belonged to. What happens now? My voice sounded strange to my ears, layered with harmonics I hadn't been able to perceive before. Now we continue our work, Ellis said. Breaking the cycle, creating understanding. The Forest Service will complete their structure, thinking they've contained the threat. We'll use it instead as a gateway, a place of controlled contact. And eventually, Jacob added, when enough of us exist, we'll reveal the truth. Not all at once, humans aren't ready for that. But gradually, reintroducing the knowledge that was lost. I thought of Dr. Abernathy, of the Forest Service's decades of misguided containment efforts. They'll resist. They've built their careers, their understanding of the world on controlling what they fear. Yes, Jacob agreed, which is why we need people like you, people who have experienced both sides, who can translate between worlds. Outside, dawn was breaking over the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. The entities me knew kin moved through the forest, no longer threatening in my perception, but simply different, their forms an expression of their nature rather than a mimicry meant to terrify. Among them, I sensed curiosity, cautious hope, and the deep loneliness of beings who had been cut off from connection for too long. They had survived by feeding on fear because fear was all that was offered to them. Given understanding instead, they could become something else entirely, partners rather than predators. I stepped outside, feeling the cold air differently now, aware of its movements and eddies, its interaction with my new self. The mountains spread before me, wild and beautiful and filled with secrets I was only beginning to comprehend. The cycle that had begun at Tomah Lookout had transformed, not ended. A new cycle was beginning, one of reconnection rather than containment, of understanding rather than fear. And I, who had come to the wilderness to escape my old life, had found a new one instead, a bridge between worlds that had been separated for far too long. The forest called, and this time I answered without fear. The email arrived on a dreary November afternoon as I sat in my cramped studio apartment, watching raindrops trace chaotic patterns down my window. The subject line read, "Urgent, Winter caretaker position, Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me click. We're seeking an experienced individual for immediate placement as winter caretaker at our remote research facility in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Position runs November through April. Duties include maintenance of generators, weather monitoring, and basic security. 4. 0 monthly plus accommodation. Satellite internet provided but limited. Must be self-sufficient and comfortable with extreme isolation. Prior wilderness experience required. Reply ASAP if interested. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. I'd spent 2 summers as a trail guide in Glacier National Park during college, but that was years ago. Since then, my life had become a monotonous cycle of unfulfilling desk jobs and mounting debt. The thought of escaping to the wilderness, even a harsh Montana winter, seemed like salvation. Within minutes, I'd fired back a response highlighting my limited but relevant experience. By the next morning, I'd received a reply requesting a video interview that afternoon. The interviewer, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, was a stern-looking woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a no-nonsense expression as she explained that their previous caretaker had left unexpectedly, creating an urgent need. The facility sits on the eastern edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, approximately 18 miles from the nearest road, she explained, her voice clipped and efficient. It was originally built as a wildlife research station, but is currently being used for atmospheric and geological studies. You'll be entirely alone most of the time, though researchers occasionally visit for a day or two. What happened to the previous caretaker, I asked. A flicker of something annoyance? Concern? Crossed her face. Personal reasons, nothing related to the job itself. She asked about my experience with generators, basic repairs, and wilderness survival. I answered honestly, but emphasized my adaptability and eagerness to learn. Something in my desperation must have convinced her, because by the end of the call, she offered me the position. There's one more thing, she said, just as I thought the interview was wrapping up. The facility sits on land that was once sacred to indigenous peoples. Some locals have superstitions about the area. You may hear stories. I assure you they're just that, stories. Before I could ask for clarification, she continued briskly. We need someone there by next week. A helicopter will transport you from Choteau, packed for 6 months of isolation in extreme conditions. Any questions? I had dozens, but only managed to ask about communication protocols and emergency procedures. As we concluded the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Blackwood was withholding something important. But the salary was too good to pass up, and the chance to escape my current life too tempting. 5 days later, I stood on a helicopter pad in Choteau, Montana, watching my few possessions being loaded aboard a weathered Bell 206. The pilot, a taciturn man named Mike, barely acknowledged me as I climbed in. As we lifted off, I gazed down at the small town receding below us, my last glimpse of civilization for the next 6 months. The helicopter banked and headed west toward the jagged outline of mountains on the horizon, the legendary Chinese wall of the Bob Marshall Wilderness. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I dismissed it as simple nerves. Little did I know that those mountains harbored secrets darker than I could imagine, and that my time as caretaker would test not just my survival skills, but my grip on reality itself. The first sign that something was off came during the helicopter flight. As we soared over the vast wilderness of the Bob, as Mike called it, the pilot grew increasingly tense. What began as a silent journey transformed when he finally spoke, voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "You sure about this job?" he asked, eyes fixed ahead. "It's good money," I replied. "Why?" Mike's weathered face remained expressionless. "4th caretaker they've hired this year." A chill ran through me despite the helicopter's stuffy cabin. 4th? They said the previous person left for personal reasons. "They all do," he muttered, then fell silent again. Before I could press him for details, the facility came into view, a cluster of rugged buildings, nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by dense pine forest with towering mountains as a backdrop. A frozen lake gleamed like polished steel to the north. "There she is," Mike said. "Home sweet home." The main building was larger than I'd expected, a two-story structure built of weathered logs with a steep metal roof. Several smaller outbuildings surrounded it, including what looked like a garage and storage sheds. Solar panels and a small wind turbine were visible, along with a large satellite dish. As we descended, I noticed something odd, a series of symbols carved into the trees at the forest's edge, facing the clearing. They appeared to form a perimeter around the entire facility. Mike followed my gaze. "Local superstition," he said dismissively. "Blackwood probably didn't mention that part." The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump. Mike helped unload my gear, then handed me a sealed envelope. "Emergency contact protocols," he explained. "I'm your extraction if things go sideways, weather permitting." As he climbed back into the cockpit, he hesitated. "Listen, if you start seeing or hearing things that don't make sense, don't ignore them. Call for pickup immediately." Before I could respond, he slammed the door, and minutes later, the helicopter was just a distant speck in the vast Montana sky. Standing alone in the clearing, surrounded by my belongings and the crushing silence of the wilderness, I felt a profound sense of isolation settle over me. The facility loomed before me, my home for the next 6 months. Inside, the main building was surprisingly comfortable, a large common area with a stone fireplace, a well-equipped kitchen, and a small library filled with scientific journals and wilderness guides. The second floor contained bedrooms, a basic medical station, and an office. Everything was meticulously organized, almost sterile in its precision. The control room, located off the main area, contained the communications equipment, weather monitoring systems, and facility controls. A detailed manual sat on the desk, along with a logbook. Curiosity piqued. I flipped through the previous entries. The most recent dated back 3 weeks, ending abruptly mid-sentence with a scrawled notation. 3:14 a.m., noise outside again. Going to check. That was it, no further entries. I spent the remainder of the day familiarizing myself with the facility's systems. The generator was in excellent condition, the pantry well stocked, and all equipment seemed to be functioning properly. As darkness fell, I prepared a simple dinner and settled into the silence. That night I slept fitfully, dreaming of being watched by countless eyes from the surrounding forest. I awoke just before dawn, certain I'd heard something moving on the roof, a scratching, dragging sound that stopped the moment I opened my eyes. The following days established a routine. I checked the generators, monitored weather conditions, performed basic maintenance, and reported daily via satellite link. Dr. Blackwood responded with brief acknowledgments but never elaborated on Mike's comment about multiple caretakers or the abrupt end to the logbook entries. On my 5th night, I discovered the hidden compartment. While rearranging books in the library, I accidentally triggered a mechanism that revealed a small recess behind one shelf. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. The handwritten title read, "Accounts of the Anomalies, Bob Marshall Wilderness, 1950, 2, present." As I opened the journal, a folded map fell out, a detailed rendering of the wilderness area with dozens of red X's marked across it. Many clustered around my current location. Scrawled across the top were the words, "Disappearance Cluster, 7. The journal contained meticulous records of unexplained phenomena and disappearances dating back decades. The earliest entries described indigenous legends about thin places in the wilderness where the barrier between worlds weakened. Later accounts detailed missing hikers, strange lights, and unexplained sounds reported by researchers and previous caretakers. One entry particularly caught my attention. March 14, 1987. The shadow figures have been observed by multiple staff members now. Always at dusk, always at the tree line. They appear human in form, but move in ways that defy natural motion. Dr. Mercer insists they're merely psychological manifestations of isolation. But how do we explain multiple people seeing the same phenomena? The symbols the locals carved seem to keep them at bay, but I fear they're growing bolder. I closed the journal, heart pounding. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling around the eaves of the building. And beneath that natural sound, I could swear I heard something else say, faint, rhythmic chanting, almost like distant voices carried on the breeze. Rising from my chair, I moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. For a moment, I saw nothing but my own reflection against the black glass. Then, at the edge of the clearing, where the facility lights barely reached the tree line, I glimpsed movement, a tall, slender figure standing perfectly still, watching the building. I blinked, and it was gone, but the sensation of being observed remained, intense and undeniable. Whatever was out there in the wilderness, I was certain of one thing: I was not as alone as I'd been led to believe. The discovery of the journal changed everything. What had begun as an isolated job in the wilderness had morphed into something far more unsettling. I found myself scrutinizing every unexplained sound, every shadow in my peripheral vision. The facility itself began to feel different after dark. During daylight hours, it was merely a functional research station, practical, unremarkable. But as night fell, the corridors seemed to elongate, shadows deepened in corners, and ordinary creaks became menacing whispers. I'd catch movement from the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. 2 weeks into my stay, I established a new ritual. Each evening before sunset, I would walk the perimeter of the clearing, checking the carved symbols in the trees. I still didn't understand their meaning, but their presence offered strange comfort, like a boundary between safety and whatever lurked beyond. One evening, as I completed my rounds, I noticed something disturbing. One of the Symbolsa spiral pattern with radiating lines had been partially obscured. Deep gouges in the bark crossed through it, as if something with massive claws had deliberately defaced it. The marking was fresh, sap still oozing from the wounded tree. That night, the sounds began. It started as a distant, rhythmic thumping, like a massive heartbeat resonating through the ground. I was in the control room filing my daily report when I first felt ETA vibration, more than a sound, pulsing up through the floor and into my bones. I checked the seismic monitors, but they showed nothing unusual. As darkness deepened, the thumping grew louder, joined by what sounded like chanting, dozens of voices, speaking in unison in a language I couldn't recognize. The voices seemed to move, circling the facility at a distance, never approaching but never retreating. I radioed Mike, breaking protocol by calling outside scheduled check-in times. "This is Eagle Base. Do you copy?" "Over." Static hissed back at me. "Mike, if you can hear me, something's happening at the facility. I need information about these sounds." After several attempts, his voice finally crackled through, distorted and fading. "Can't hear, storm coming, stay inside it." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving me alone with the pulsing sounds that now seemed to come from all directions. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. Bundling up against the bitter cold and arming myself with a powerful flashlight and the facility's shotgun, I ventured outside. The night was clear and still, stars blazing overhead with the crystalline brightness unique to high altitudes. The moon cast blue-white light across the snow, creating sharp shadows. The thumping stopped the moment I stepped outside. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the noise had been. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, its beam inadequate against the vast darkness. As I approached the edge of the clearing, near the defaced symbol, my light caught something reflective in the tree's 12 points of light, like eyes watching me. They were at least 7 feet off the ground. "Hello?" My voice sounded pathetically small. "Is someone there?" The eyes blinked once, then were joined by another pair, and another, until a dozen pairs of reflective eyes stared back at me from different points in the darkness. None of them moved. They simply watched. Panic seized me. I fired a warning shot into the air, the blast deafening in the mountain silence. The eyes didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, they began to advance slowly toward the clearing, moving in perfect unison. I backed toward the main building, keeping my light trained on the approaching eyes. As they reached the tree line, where the carved symbols formed their perimeter, they stopped abruptly, all except one pair, which continued forward. As it emerged from the shadows, my flashlight revealed not a person or animal, but something that defied categorization. It had a roughly humanoid form but moved with a jerking, unnatural gait, as if its joints bent in impossible ways. Its skin, if it could be called, that appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a silhouette that seemed darker than the night itself. My back hit the door of the main building. Fumbling with the handle, I kept my eyes fixed on the approaching figure. It stopped at the exact center of the clearing, head tilting at an impossible angle as it regarded me. Then, in a motion too quick to follow, it raised an elongated arm and pointed directly at me. From the forest, the chanting resumed louder now, urgent and rhythmic. The figure in the clearing began to change, its outline blurring and shifting like smoke in wind. It grew taller, limbs elongating until it towered at least 10 feet high. In that moment, rational thought abandoned me. I wrenched the door open and threw myself inside, slamming and locking it behind me. I raced through the building, securing every entrance and window, then huddled in the control room, shotgun across my lap. The communications equipment came to life spontaneously, emitting bursts of static interspersed with fragments of voices, some speaking normally, others screaming. Through the cacophony, I could make out repeated phrases. "They're coming through," and "the barrier is weakening." Outside, the chanting reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was broken by a sound I'll never forget, a slow, deliberate knocking at the front door. 3 distinct knocks, followed by a pause, then 3 more. Then a voice so human it was almost worse, called my name. Not my first name or last name, but my middle name, one I never used and hadn't mentioned to anyone associated with this job. "We've been waiting for you," the voice said softly, almost tenderly. "The others weren't right, but you're perfect." The knocking continued throughout the night, moving methodically from door to door, window to window, even to sections of wall where no openings existed. I remained in the control room until dawn, when blessed silence finally returned. In the morning light, I searched the perimeter. Fresh snow had fallen, covering any tracks that might have explained the night's events. The defaced symbol had been completely obliterated, the tree now bearing a deep, charred gash, as if struck by lightning, except there had been no storm. As I turned to head back inside, something caught my eye, a small object half buried in the snow beneath the damaged tree. I dug it out and found myself holding a voice recorder, the kind researchers might use for field notes. Back inside, I pressed play with trembling fingers. A man's voice, ragged with fear, filled the room. "Day 43. They're getting closer. The symbols don't work anymore. I think the facility isn't meant to keep them out. It's meant to keep something in." Below, the recording cut off in a burst of static, followed by a scream that didn't sound entirely human. I recognized the voice. It belonged to the previous caretaker, the one who had supposedly left for personal reasons. The voice recorder changed everything. If the previous caretaker hadn't left voluntarily, what had happened to him? And what did he mean about the facility keeping something in rather than out? I spent the next day searching the main building for any hidden areas or access points to lower levels. The facility blueprints showed no basement or substructure, yet the recorder's message suggested otherwise. As darkness approached, I grew increasingly frantic, checking behind bookshelves, under rugs, tapping on walls for hollow spaces. I found nothing. Outside, the sky darkened prematurely as heavy storm clouds rolled in from the west, promising another isolated night in the wilderness. I was in the control room, reviewing the facility's power consumption logs, when I noticed something odd: regular power surges every night between 2:00 and 4:00 a.m., drawing electricity to a part of the system not accounted for in the building schematics. The power routing diagram showed the anomalous current flowing toward the stone fireplace in the common area. I approached it cautiously, examining every inch of the massive structure. The craftsmanship was impressive: large river stones fitted together with barely visible mortar, the hearth made of a single slab of granite. Kneeling on the hearth, I pressed against various stones, looking for a hidden mechanism. Nothing moved. As I shifted my weight, however, I noticed that one corner of the granite slab seemed to depress slightly. Applying firm, steady pressure, I felt a click beneath me as a hidden latch disengaged. The entire hearth slid backward with a low rumble, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rushed upward, carrying an unpleasant odor like ozone mixed with something organic and rotting. Common sense told me to seal the opening and call for emergency extraction. Instead, Driven by a compulsion I couldn't explain, I gathered a flashlight, the shotgun, and the journal I'd found, and began my descent. The staircase spiraled downward, carved directly into bedrock. The walls were inscribed with the same symbols I'd seen on the trees, but these were more elaborate, forming continuous patterns that seemed to writhe in my flashlight beam. The air grew colder with each step, and a low humming vibration permeated the stone. After descending what felt like several hundred feet, I reached a massive steel door. It looked jarringly modern compared to the ancient-feeling staircase, with a digital keypad mounted beside it. A small plaque read, "Project Threshold, authorized personnel only." I tried various combinations on the keypad without success. As I contemplated my next move, the humming intensified, and the temperature dropped precipitously. My breath clouded before me, and frost began forming on the door's metal surface. Behind me, from the darkness of the stairwell, came a sound I recognized from the previous night, the unnatural footsteps of something that moved in ways no human could. I spun around, shotgun raised, but my flashlight revealed only empty stairs. The keypad suddenly activated on its own, digits lighting up in a sequence. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a corridor beyond. With the sounds from the stairwell growing closer, I had little choice but to move forward. The corridor led to a large, circular chamber filled with scientific equipment, much of it appearing decades old, interspersed with cutting-edge technology. Monitoring stations ringed the walls, their screens displaying data I couldn't interpret. At the center of the room stood what looked like a containment chambera, cylindrical structure of glass and metal, connected to the ceiling and floor by thick cables and pipes. The containment chamber was empty, its door hanging open. Whatever it had been designed to hold was gone. One monitor displayed a map of the Bob Marshall Wilderness, with pulsing red dots indicating what appeared to be tracking signals. They were moving, converging on the facility's location from all directions. Another screen showed security camera feeds from around the facility's perimeter. With growing horror, I watched as dozens of the shadow figures I'd seen emerged from the tree line, moving toward the building with that same unnatural gait. A final monitor displayed a simple message: containment failure, convergence imminent, protocol Omega authorized. A nearby desk held stacks of reports and a leather-bound logbook similar to the one I'd found upstairs. Flipping through it revealed the true purpose of the facility: not atmospheric or geological research, but the study of what the documents called interdimensional anomalies. According to the logs, the Bob Marshall Wilderness contained several thin points, where the barrier between dimensions weakened periodically. The indigenous people had known this for centuries, marking these locations with protective symbols and avoiding them during certain celestial alignments. In the 1950s, the government had established research outposts at these locations. This facility, designated Threshold Station 7, had been built to monitor and study a particularly active breach point. But in 1987, something had gone terribly wrong. An entity had crossed through during an experiment and been captured. The logs detailed decades of research on this being, referred to only as the Visitor. Scientists noted its ability to influence human minds, causing hallucinations, paranoia, and eventually complete psychological breakdown in those exposed to it for extended periods. The final entries, dated just weeks before my arrival, described increasing instability in the containment systems and the entity's growing influence over the facility staff. The last entry, written in a shaky hand, read, "It's speaking through us now. We hear its voice even when we're awake. Dr. Blackwood has ordered evacuation, but I fear it's too late. It knows about the others, the ones still on the other side. It's calling to them." A tremendous crash from above interrupted my reading. Something had entered the main building. Multiple impacts followed, as if numerous heavy objects were being thrown about. Then came the sound of splintering wood as something began descending the hidden staircase. With no other escape route visible, I moved toward the containment chamber, hoping to find another exit beyond it. As I approached, the air seemed to thicken, making each step require enormous effort. The humming intensified to a painful degree, vibrating through my skull. Inside the chamber, I discovered not another exit but a small pedestal holding what appeared to be an ancient stone artifact, roughly triangular, covered in the same symbols I'd seen throughout the facility and in the surrounding forest. It pulsed with a faint blue light that intensified as I reached toward it. The moment my fingers touched the stone, a searing pain shot through my body. Visions flooded my mind, countless worlds, stacked against each other like pages in a book, separated by the thinnest of barriers. I saw entities moving between these worlds through tears and reality, drawn to places where the barriers had weakened. And I saw this place, this facility, built directly over one such tier. The artifact in my hand, the only thing preventing a complete breach. The visions showed me the truth. The caretaker position had never been about maintaining the facility. It was about finding someone compatible with the artifact, someone who could strengthen the failing seal between worlds. The previous caretakers had been incompatible, their minds broken by contact with the artifact or the entity it had once contained. As this realization struck, the chamber door slammed shut behind me. Through its glass walls, I could see figures entering the main room, wearing the tattered remains of research uniforms, others the twisted shadow forms I'd glimpsed in the forest. They surrounded the chamber, watching as the artifact in my hand grew brighter. A voice spoke directly into my mind, ancient and alien, yet somehow familiar. The seal must be renewed. A sacrifice must be made. You understand now, don't you? Why you were chosen? Why you were called here? The artifact burned in my hand, fusing with my flesh as its light engulfed the chamber. Through the pain, I understood my purpose and the terrible choice before me. The artifact had become part of me, its light pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat as it seared itself into my palm. Through the glass of the containment chamber, the figures outside watched impassively, former researchers and shadow entities alike, all vessels now for whatever force had breached our world. The voice in my mind continued, neither male nor female, but somehow both and neither. Every 66 years, the barriers thin. What you call stars align. Passages open. The seal requires renewal, a conscious choice, freely made. Images flooded my consciousness, the history of this place unfolding like a film. Indigenous peoples performing rituals at this exact spot for centuries, keeping the barrier intact through their understanding of the natural world. Then came European settlers, scientists, government agencies, each discovering the anomaly and attempting to control it through their own methods, unaware they were merely the latest caretakers in an ancient lineage. Your predecessor refused. The voice continued. His mind broke rather than accept. The one before fled. The one before her tried to destroy the artifact. All failed. The seal weakens. The convergence approaches. Outside the chamber, the entities began a slow, circling movement, their forms blurring together into a churning mass of shadow and half-glimpsed features. Through the ceiling, I could sense rather than see the storm intensifying above the facility, not a natural weather pattern but a manifestation of the weakening barrier between worlds. What do you want from me? I asked aloud, though I already knew the answer. Acceptance. Binding. You become the seal. Your consciousness, the bridge. Your body, the anchor. The implications were clear. I would neither die nor truly live, but exist in a state between, holding the barrier closed with my own being. I would become like the indigenous symbols carved into trees, a ward, a boundary marker, a living lock on a door that must never open. And if I refused? The chamber walls rippled as if made of liquid rather than glass. Beyond the circling entities, the facility itself began to warp, straight lines bending into impossible angles as reality itself distorted. Then the convergence completes. Worlds bleed together. What exists on one side exists on all. Comprehension is extinction for beings such as you. A new image formed in my mind, the map I'd seen with red X's marking disappearances. But now I understood these weren't simply missing persons. They were failed seals, points where the barrier had momentarily weakened and then reestablished itself, consuming those nearby in the process. Each disappearance represented a narrowly averted catastrophe. The facility's hidden purpose was never research, it was containment. using science to continue what indigenous wisdom had maintained for generations. The caretaker position was bait, drawing compatible candidates to the site where they could be tested against the artifact. And I had passed that test. My mind had not shattered upon contact. I could withstand the merger. As this realization solidified, the artifact's light intensified, spreading up my arm in glowing tendrils that traced my veins. The pain was extraordinary but somehow distant, as if happening to someone else. My consciousness expanded, encompassing the facility, the surrounding wilderness, the thin places between worlds. I sensed Dr. Blackwood and her team monitoring from a safe distance, their instruments registering the energy surge as the artifact activated. I understood now that she had never expected me to leave this place. The 6-month contract was a fiction. This had always been a one-way journey. The choice before me was simple yet impossible: sacrifice my existence as I knew it to maintain the barrier, or refuse and doom not just this remote corner of Montana, but potentially the entire world to an invasion from something utterly beyond human comprehension. In that moment of clarity, I also understood why the entities had called my middle name through the door that night. They had accessed something deep in my psyche, the parts of myself I kept hidden, searching for weaknesses, for a reason I might refuse the burden being offered. The circling figures outside the chamber moved faster now, their forms elongating as they picked up speed. The voice returned, more urgent. Choose now. The window closes. The convergence cannot be stopped again if you refuse. I thought of the life I'd left behind, the dreary apartment, the meaningless jobs, the mounting debt. I thought of the wilderness above me, the vast expanse of the Bob, with its towering peaks and ancient forests. And I thought of the unknown number of previous caretakers who had stood where I now stood, facing the same impossible choice. With a clarity I had never before experienced, I made my decision. I accept, I whispered, and the world exploded into blue light. Time ceased to have meaning. I existed everywhere within the facility and nowhere at once. My consciousness expanded to encompass the entire mountain range, sensing every thin place, every potential breach in the barriers between worlds. I could feel entities pressing against these barriers from the other side, testing, searching for weakness, and finding none as long as I maintained my vigil. The researchers returned eventually, setting up monitoring equipment at a safe distance. They never entered the containment chamber, which now pulsed with a steady blue light visible even from the surface. New caretakers were appointed, genuine ones this time, tasked with maintaining the facility around my chamber, ensuring the power never failed, the systems never degraded. They speak in hushed tones when they approach, leaving offerings like the indigenous peoples once did, small tokens of respect and gratitude. Some feel fear in my presence. Others, a profound sense of peace. None stay long. None can withstand prolonged exposure to what I have become. Seasons pass, years, decades. I perceive them all simultaneously, past and present flowing together. The wilderness above changes, slowly trees grow, die, regenerate. Wildlife follows ancient migration patterns, unaware of what lies beneath their feet. Occasionally, hikers pass nearby, and I gently nudge their thoughts, directing them away from the facility that now appears abandoned to casual observation. Sometimes, in quiet moments when the barriers are strongest, I can focus my consciousness enough to remember who I was, a person with hopes and fears, someone seeking escape and purpose. In those moments, I almost regret my choice. But then I sense them again, the entities pressing against reality's edge, and I know that regret is a luxury the world cannot afford. I am the seal, the guardian, the caretaker of the thin place. And so I remain, deep below the remote Montana wilderness, holding back the dark between worlds with what remains of my humanity, a willing sacrifice to forces I can now name, but have no words in human language to describe. If you're reading this account, it means something has changed. The barriers may be weakening again. A new convergence may be approaching. Or perhaps enough time has passed that my story can finally be told. Either way, remember this. In the remote corners of wilderness, where civilization's light barely reaches, there are thin places between worlds. And in those places, there are guardians like me, maintaining the boundaries that keep reality intact. Listen carefully if you venture into such places. If you hear your name called from the darkness, especially a name few people know, do not answer. Do not investigate. Simply turn back and return to the world of light and solid things. For what calls to you is not something you want to meet, and what it offers is not a choice anyone should have to make.